Hey guys, wanted to make one more video here. Something I hope you guys would find interesting. It's another car that in my collection I love, and it's something that I've had an interesting ownership history with, and here it is. It is a 2007 997.1 turbo. The exterior color on this thing is a slate gray, and it's got some mods that we can talk about. I guess we can start here. These are HRE P40s. They're very concaved. These are 19-inch, both front and rear. It's got the GT2 RS side skirts, as well as a carbon intake cover. And then it's got the GT2 RS rear wing. And beneath that, it's got the Works carbon diffuser. And it has a car graphics exhaust with sports cats. And it's also got the GT3 RS fender flares. And in the front, finishes it off with a Tech Art style carbon fiber front splitter from Rotec. Let's get in the car. And it's a 6-speed manual with black leather interior. So let's go for a drive, and I can tell you about my ownership with Porsche, how I got into the brand, why this exists. All right, let's get it dialed in. I'm going to be driving with one hand because this is a manual. Okay, so as I said, this is a 997.1 turbo. The one thing that didn't show up in the cameras because it was hard to capture, the additional mod that it has is KW coilovers, as well as GT2 RS intercoolers. And finally, to top it off, it has a GAC tune. With all that said, this car probably pushes somewhere slightly north of 600 horsepower, which in my opinion is plenty enough for the streets. Any more than that, I think you're pretty pretty nutty. But I guess you can never have too much, right? So how did I come to own this car? Well, I'll tell you the story before I even had this car into my life, which is back in the days I was more so into JDM cars, and I had a 1994 Toyota Supra Turbo, one of those very sought after Need for Speed, or what's that movie, Fast and Furious type cars. And I had that thing done to the 10. So if you know anything about the 1994 Toyota Supra, or if you were into the JDM car scene, then you might recognize some of the brands that I'm about to spew out that I had installed on the Supra, starting with a Veilside kit, the full Veilside kit. It's got a gritty front mount intercooler. Oh God, I had Racing Heart wheels on that thing. HKS Super Dragger exhaust. Had gritty air intake. I forgot what else. I mean, chip tune, everything that you can think of on that car. And I don't know what compelled me, but not long after I had that car done, say about maybe 6 months, I sold it. And I didn't really have any reason to, but it just felt like maybe it could be the right time to move into something else. There wasn't anything that was grabbing my attention. And that car was a 6-speed manual as well. In fact, that was my first manual car. But in any case, it just it was just something that left me. And I gone maybe about another 6 months without buying anything else, only because I couldn't decide what I wanted. The other cars at the time, probably if I was to stick with the JDM scene, would have been the 300ZX Turbo from Nissan, the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, or the Mazda RX-7. Those were kind of the cars that kept in line with the JDM scene. Although there was one car that I really did like, and that would have been the Acura NSX. So that could have been the contender. And I had actually someone in my family that got one of those. Although I never actually had the experience of driving it. I've definitely been in the passenger seat a few times, and that's a pretty damn cool car. In fact, if I ever decide to add a JDM car back into my life here, I think the NSX would definitely be on top of that list. Now, what ultimately I did purchase after selling the Supra was a 2000 996 C2 Porsche 911. So the one with the sort of eggshell headlights that people say, or is it the egg style headlights? I don't know what they say. I don't know what they call it, but yeah, it was that one. I guess the ugly stepchild in the whole 911 family. But interestingly, I don't know what compelled me to get it, because at that time I was really into horsepower and performance of speed and whatnot, and so the Porsche really didn't fit that bill. But I think what compelled me was that Porsche was just introduced to the market after the 993. And another thing about the 993 I'll get to in a little bit here, but the 996, I think it's because it just launched and it looked like a compelling car, and nothing else on the market at the time really caught my eye. I didn't really care for the BMW M3. Can't remember what Mercedes had at the time. So anyway, I found a Porsche out in Riverside, and it was I can't remember which silver, but it was definitely a silver colored Porsche with black interior as well. Now, because I mod my cars, ultimately what that car got was the 996 GT3 front bumper and side skirts, matched with a Gambala rear deck wing, and also I had I think a Gambala exhaust on it as well. And then that was closed off with Bilstein PSS9 coilovers, and it also had 18-inch, I think, Gambala racing wheels that kind of look like speed lines. So it was a car that couldn't match the horsepower with the Toyota Supra, but ultimately what won me over was the way that car engaged the driver. I don't know what happened, but the Porsche was just like magic to me, and it's driving requirements such that you had to pay attention. Not that you didn't have to with the Supra, but with the 911, because the way it corners, you had to be very attentive, in that you could take corners much faster, much more stable. And it was just a car that really, it drove like nothing else. Not to say that the Supra probably couldn't have. I think maybe if I had it dialed in a little better with the suspension settings and whatnot, it might have been able to get, I don't want to even say replicate the way the 911 feels, because to this day I don't think anything really does drive like a 911. But in any case, that was a car that that was my introduction to Porsche, and that was a car that, as well, on the day that I got rid of, I was sad to see it let go. So what Porsche taught me was driver engagement, how fun that is, how important that is. The way that the car handled, it was not something where you would drag race someone from a red light, but you know, going to a twisty canyon, that kind of drive, it was so much more rewarding. The Supra was something that kind of encouraged one to, say, drive faster from light to light, as long as the road was straight. I mean, it had the all-out power, but it wasn't engaging in any way. I think maybe then it's just that for me, I found the way that I like driving cars is more driving on canyons. This is an interesting spot, 356, right in front of me. You'll see cars like this on a nice day out in SoCal, so pretty cool spotting to be driving with something like this. Anyway, so the 996 was a perfect car, and just as history repeats itself, like the Supra, when I had it finally all done, the 996 also went when it was finally all done. So after I sold the 996, I went about another year or so, a few years actually, maybe 2 or 3 years without another Porsche. I didn't really even have a sports car then, I don't think. But I then decided that I would get another Porsche in my life. And I didn't know which one to get. And at the time, the 997 was the body style that Porsche had. And that was a car that I thought, okay, it looked pretty damn good. I think a lot of people complain about the way the 996 looked. And so when Porsche designed the 997, they kind of made it resemble the 993 a little bit more. I think the 993 had such a winning design that Porsche kind of went back towards that. And so it just so happened by chance that I was driving by the Porsche dealer, and there was this particular car sitting right in front, outside, being advertised for sale. So I inquired about it, and it was a 2007 one-owner car, and the previous owner was a lawyer. He took he took some great care of this thing. This thing was pristine when I purchased it. It had about maybe 13,000 miles. Right now I'm just a bit over 27. And he was the one who actually had the wheels installed. He had the exhaust installed, and he had some suspension linkages installed as well. So he was definitely an enthusiast, but one owner car, no accidents, clean records, service all done. So at the time, the car was about 75,000, I think it was when I bought it. So maybe you can argue that it was a good purchase, because I think these things have climbed up in value. If I'm not mistaken, these cars in manual trim are going north over 100,000 right now. But it certainly wasn't my intention to buy it as an investment. It was just something that, ownership over time, markets dictate based on demand, and here we are. So what's interesting about this car too is that history almost repeated itself the third time. And after I had all the suspension and all the mods that you've seen done to this car, it was a car that for some reason, and I don't know if this was because I just tend to have this inclination to sell cars after I got them modded the way I did, or I don't know why, but I know I enjoyed this car. I just didn't know if I loved it. And I guess maybe it's just the petrolhead issue, in that you're always hunting for what's next. Maybe that was it. And the cars that I were looking at, I thought, well, what else could give me a better enjoyment than the 997? So this car has ample power. Like I said, it's got over 600 horsepower. I would say thereabouts. It's so engaging to drive. It's got the 6-speed manual transmission, and it handles on rails. This car actually sits lower than the Carrera GT, and the KWs offer such great feedback. Because it is stiffer, of course, you're going to feel every little bump in the road, but it doesn't break your back. It's comfortable enough that if I had to go for an hour or two, I wouldn't have a problem driving this car. But at the same time, when you want to take a corner, this thing stays flat. The only downside to the fact that this car is so low is that you have to be very careful about where you're driving it. And this is a car that I do drive mostly on roads that I know, because of dips and potholes and things like that. I don't want to damage this car, so I tend to drive it on roads that I know how to navigate. So it's not necessarily ideal in the way of, you know, driving this car anywhere. You'll never know when you'll meet a driveway that you can't clear or something that will scrape the bottom of the car. But that is my own doing. I certainly didn't have to have this car lower that low, but it is what it is. But I think if you left this car stock, it would have been easily something that you could daily drive. The manual engagement is such an important part of driving, and I think that's one of the reasons why this car has stayed with me for so long. Because when I was done modding this car and looking for the next car to replace this with, there were so many times where I came so close to pulling the trigger. Needless to say, the fact that I'm making a video with this car now, I have not yet traded this car away. And I think over the times that I kept thinking and considering it, and the fact that it's still here, is a testament to actually how much I actually do love this car. And my intention with it is no longer to even let it be considered as a trade or even to sell. In fact, I think as it's going to boil down to is I'm just going to own this for the rest of my life. If I'm never in a position where I do have to sell this thing, so worst case it just sits if that's really the case, but I doubt that. This is something I really love to get behind the wheel of and drive every so often. And I own a different Porsche as well. I own the 991.1 GT3, and that was when Porsche really changed the way the chassis was designed, because that is a much bigger and different car than this is. I'll make another video with that, and there's something interesting about that Porsche that I'll talk about when that video comes. But this is a car that I'm definitely not going to be making the mistake of selling or getting rid of as I did with my other cars. As a matter of fact, I find it very interesting that it's the modern cars that don't really interest me as much anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Huracans are great. I think the F8 is awesome. 488 Pista. I mean, you know, all these cars, these modern cars, they're definitely awesome. And I shouldn't say that I wouldn't be lucky enough and want one at some point in my life. But what has interested me, and I found, is that the older cars that are less digital and more analog, and there is something to be said about that, they offer so much more driver enjoyment, because those are the cars that give you feedback in a way modern cars can't. Modern cars, I think they've gotten so far away from that. They've become way more comfortable and way more capable. You know, imagine a Ferrari F8, for example, or even the newest or current 911 Turbo. I mean, those cars, you're sitting almost in like a lazy boy chair, and you know, you got so much more horsepower, and I think it's made to be that way so that you can concentrate on the speed that you're going. Whereas something like this is certainly more Spartan, and it requires so much more of your attention. And so every time you get out of a car driving something that requires your full attention, you're feeling like it's kind of a workout, if you will. And I think that's what's so satisfying, is that when you're done with the drive on a car like this, you're just thinking, man, you know, I can't wait till the next time I get to take one out again. And I contrast that, and my evidence in that is the difference between driving the 997 Turbo and the GT3. So I'll get more into that later. But in the meantime, this is a car that I can go as fast as I want practically in any gear. This car just goes like stink, and it corners great. It has hydraulic steering, so you feel what the road is doing. It's got a great clutch. It's not stiff. It's great for day-to-day driving. I don't know what more you could really want in a car. I mean, as far as everything written on paper, this car is hard to beat. But again, I always go back to saying that it's the manual transmission that really makes this car what it is. I will say for sure that if this car was a Tiptronic or automatic, I probably would not have had this car by now. It would have been sold a long time ago. So this car, by the way, the 997, I think, is the perfect size. This interior, I don't know, I feel like it's, I don't want to say peak Porsche, but I can't think of another one. I think maybe the 991, I would equate that interior design to be a good design from Porsche. The 992, I don't know, it's starting to feel a little more complicated. I think Porsches have always had somewhat of a simplicity to their interior design. I mean, if you look at the 993, for example, that design is very Spartan. Its layout is I don't know what opinion you might have on it, but it's not very cohesive, I think. It's just little things laid out here and there, and whether they make sense or not, they're there. So, but this 997 design, I think the interior is just right. So the other thing to mention is the size of this car. It's not big like the 991 or even the 992, which I think is actually bigger than the 991. This car is very, I guess, compact, you can call it, and is very nimble. I've always loved cars that are designed that way. I don't necessarily like the bigger chassis cars, and it's just a perfect size. I think the recent cars, and you probably know this as well, have all gotten bigger over the ages, and I don't know if that's regulations or what that is, but this is a great size for a 911. I think if you remember back to the way 911s were designed to be, they were designed to be small, nimble sports cars, and I think the bigger chassis kind of got a little away from that. However, the 993 I mentioned earlier is a car that I think is another 911 that I would like to add to my lineup someday. And I had a couple attempts at that slipped through, but I'm hoping maybe third time's a charm. So we'll see. We'll see if I am able to find a 993 that I can add to the collection. In the meantime, I think, what more can I say about this? This is an awesome car to have. Another car that, where the other cars I considered trading this for at the time were the 458. I can't think of what else. It was definitely the 458. A couple of different Ferraris I think I looked at, and this car always kind of was the car that I would maybe trade away from having a lack of space, more or less. But the 458 was one. I'm trying to remember what else. But whatever it was, it stood the test of time, and it just wasn't something I could let go. And I think it's one of those things where once I get into the car and drive it, it just erases away the thoughts of that. I mean, it's just that rewarding to drive. So, yeah, and the interesting thing is you don't really see too many of these 997 turbos anymore. In fact, I think even the 997s in general, you don't see too much. I don't know. I feel like Porsches have this unique following where people really cherish them, and they're definitely driven cars, But at least where I live, you don't really see 997s that much. You see a lot of 991.1s or 992s. But yeah, for some reason, not too many 997s. And every once in a while, when I see a 993, man, that thing just captures me. Anyhow, I think I'm pretty much done with this drive, so we'll shoot a little bit of that. And if there's any questions, things that you guys might want to know or ask, please do so, and I'll certainly make follow-up videos on this. I'll throw one more thing before I go, and that is the ownership of this car has been relatively easy, keeping in mind that it is a 2007. Right now I have about, like I said, a little bit over 27,000 miles. But ownership has been pretty straightforward. This car has just basic maintenance. Nothing's gone wrong with the car. This car has got the infamous Metzger engine, built like, built like a fortress, really. I think it's got motorsports heritage to it, so it's really built to take power. The testament of that is this is, again, pushing north of 600 horsepower, and it has no issues. So anyway, I figure I'd throw that in there for you guys. Again, we'll talk soon. Hopefully you guys have any questions or statements or anything you want to address, let me know. See you guys.